Thank you for coming to listen to me today. Dan is in the back there with doing the slides, so I don't have a clicker or anything, so it may take a bit to progress through this. But I'll be talking today, as you can see, the title, None Could Go Against the King of England, the Crouchback in the History of Medieval Wales. Crouchback is the first book in one of my series, The Welsh Guard Mysteries. I'll be talking specifically about the history of Wales as well as about my writing. Feel free to raise a hand. It's a small enough group that if you have something specific you want to ask right now for clarification, feel free to do so, but otherwise I'll take questions at the end.
So Sarah?
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about your background, or is that planned?
I'm getting there. Yep, we'll get there. So you can progress the slide, Dan. Yeah, that one. One more. So I'm going to start today with setting the stage for the fall of Wales to England. And that actually begins with a battle that the Welsh won. The ruler of Wales at that time was a man named Llywelyn ap Griffith. The ruler of England was Edward I, who we'll all know from William Wallace, from Longshanks. So he practiced on Wales first. So in November of 1282, the English had not seen the great victories that they had expected with the start of this war in the spring. Winter was coming on, and there was an urgency now to get this war over quickly. To that end, King Edward had sent a man named Tanny to Anglesey to capture the harvest, and while he himself was holed up at a castle called Rhuddlan here in eastern Wales. Llywelyn was sitting at Aber, Garth Celyn, and the idea was to catch him in a pincer movement. Taking a page out of the Roman tradition, Tanny had built what is known as a bridge of boats across this body of water right here called the Menai Strait. At low tide, the sands are exposed, so you can actually walk across the entire strait to the other side. Or you could in the past. They've dredged it now, so you can't do it anymore. But there was a road from Rhuddlan forcing the river at Caerhun and then through the mountains down to Aber. And that road actually would continue in the Middle Ages across the strait to where Tanny was settled. So he built a bridge of boats. And I don't know what this actually looks like, but I kind of picture like a string of rowboats with wooden boards over the top, because he had horses, right? Horses' hooves sink into the sand. That wasn't going to go well for moving an army of 1,000 men across the river. And I don't know if it was that many, but it was at least 500. So he built this bridge of boats, and then at that point, the Archbishop of Canterbury intervenes, trying to minimize the bloodshed, and he goes to Aber and tries to negotiate a peace between Edward and Llywelyn. While the Archbishop of Canterbury is there, Tanny decides to surprise Llywelyn without waiting for King Edward. He sets across his bridge of boats, and the thing about the Menai Strait is that it is a dangerous body of water, one of the most dangerous in the world because of the tides. It's separated, it goes from here on the southwest side to the northwest east side, and the tides are really, really treacherous in this narrow channel. So the only time that it's safe to cross is an hour before high and low tide. So it's an hour before low tide. The sands are exposed all the way across. So they set off on these bridge of boats across, trying to surprise Llywelyn on the Gwynedd shore. The Welsh surprise them instead and meet them on the beach. With that, caught now between the bridge of boats and this opposing force of Welsh people, they get kind of slaughtered on the beach, and then they flee. But unfortunately for them, by that time the tide has literally turned, and the bridge of boats is no longer safe. As reported in the medieval Chronicle of the Kings, the king and his host came to Rhuddlan. Oh, yeah, thank you, Dan. And he sent a fleet of ships to Anglesey, and then was made the bridge over the Menai. But the bridge broke, and countless numbers of the English were drowned, and others slain. The English lost Tanny himself, several other noblemen, 16 knights, and 400 regular soldiers to the water. It was a great victory for the Welsh. Unfortunately, it was also their undoing.
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Why were these people fighting in the first place?
Yeah, we'll get to that. That's basically what the talk is about. I thought I'd begin with something like this, but that is basically what the talk is about. Okay. The reason for, Dan, next slide. The reason for the loss was because, inspired by the victory, Llywelyn left his brother in charge of Gwynedd and traveled to Kilmeri, where this monument is now, where the English lured him into an ambush and assassinated him. This single event is what drew me to start writing books set in medieval Wales in the first place. It isn't often that you get a moment in history that is so pivotal, that one person, one event, and the world has changed forever. Next slide, Dan. Crouchback, in particular, the book that some of you may have read, takes the ambush and murder of Llywelyn ap Griffith and asks, how do those who survive the end of the world keep on living? Here we go. There's me. So before we do get any further, I thought I should say a bit about me and how I got started writing books set in medieval Wales in the first place. People often ask me, why Wales? And why I have, in fact, learned to speak Welsh. When I'm in Wales, I'm going to show off here, this is how I answer. Des I i Gymru, y tro cyntaf yn ystod fy amser yn prifysgol, nes I ymweld I Castell Conwy I syrthio mewn ceriad. Wedyn, dyrodd fy dad wrth I fi ges I deulu oedd yn byw yn Gymru 400 mlynedd yn ôl. So, in other words, sorry, in English, I visited Wales for the first time while I was in college, and these friends and I went to Stonehenge, but we also went to Conwy Castle in Wales, and I fell in love with the people, with the culture, with the language. And then my father told me that we had Welsh ancestry 400 years ago. And at that point, eventually, I just started reading everything I could about medieval Wales. My degree is in anthropology, my parents was in history. It was sort of a natural thing, and mostly both fiction and nonfiction. I'm a huge proponent of historical fiction, obviously. Eventually, I got started writing books set in Wales, in large part of this amazing, complicated history, the story of which is just one of a million that I could tell you. So often, it's like you can't make this stuff up. Like if it wasn't real, you'd be like, oh, that would never happen. It's like, well, yeah. In particular, I was interested in the period of Welsh independence before the conquest by England. The next step for me, however, was not, in fact, writing novels, but a degree in anthropology. I graduated from the University of Washington in 1995. Actually, when my friends and I visited Wales that first time, I was at Cambridge University. I had a junior year abroad there. And that kind of is partly what set me on this path. I didn't get a job at a university. Instead, I stayed home and homeschooled my 4 children for 20 years, 15 years. Well, for the whole time. All the while continuing sort of this interest in Wales. My oldest is now 34, so that sort of tells you I've been immersed in Welsh history for a long time. I didn't start writing novels until 2006, so we are coming up on 20 years now in April. So as an anthropologist, I see history in its essence as the anthropology of the past. What an anthropologist does is essentially translate, one culture for another. So you go visit another culture and you translate what's happening there for a different culture to understand, to create essentially cultural communication. With writing books set in medieval Wales, I view it exactly the same way, except rather than a modern culture, I'm going back to medieval Wales and translating their lives for a modern audience. So history is just anthropology of the past. And hi, Dan, you can do it. Yeah, so this is the joke. So there's always this point when I start talking about I write books set in medieval Wales, where people go, medieval Wales. And their eyes kind of cross, and you're just like, yeah, not the aquatic mammal, the country. So Wales isn't a place that very many Americans know much about, though many of us are, in fact, descended from Welsh people. It tends to be a little bit hidden for reasons I'm not entirely sure of. My job in writing fiction is at times educating people about medieval Wales while still writing a good story. Next one, Dan. Just so we're all on the same page, Wales is a small country. It's part of the United Kingdom now. They speak Welsh and English. We have a house in Carnarvon. 80% of the people are native Welsh speakers, so that's their first language. It was composed of smaller kingdoms in the Middle Ages. As you can see here, the three are Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth. Those are the main three. And just to say, Wales is the size of Umatilla County. If you think of Britain as a whole, it is the size of Oregon. But in the Middle Ages, you're on foot or horseback, so it does make distances a little bit different. So that's Wales. Obviously, this is the inset here, eventually conquered by England, as we now know. Next one, Dan. To get to the heart of this talk, I'm going to go quite back far in time because Llywelyn and Edward didn't come into conflict just because based on their personal differences. From the very beginning, Wales was at the crossroads of competing cultures and powerful armies. It took 1,500 years of history to really reach the point where Wales fell irrevocably to England. So this chart kind of gives a good overview of how I'm going to talk about it. On the top is a timeline showing the waves of immigration/invasion and when they happened, who was responsible. And below is a rough snapshot of how much of Britain each of these groups controlled. So we'll get back to that chart. That won't be the last time you see it. We're going to begin actually with the first peoples, Stone Age, Neolithic peoples, who weren't even on that chart. In large part because we don't know a lot about them. They probably arrived in Britain sometime around 10,000 years ago. These people herded cattle and built massive stone monuments like Stonehenge. That is a standing stone there. This is a path, an ancient road. This is actually the road that King Edward was supposed to walk to march along. That standing stone's been there for 5,000 years, so people have been using this road for that long. The Romans, when they got here, discovered that they couldn't build their roads like they like to in very straight lines and right along the coast, so they just improved this. It was actually the modern road until into the 20th century. Anyway, these people had no written language, and if they included different waves of people, we don't have enough information to know that. Next one. The next one, though, is the Celts. And these are the first people that we know somewhat more about. They brought their language and culture and essentially took over all of Britain and Ireland, starting around 800 BC, which is the Iron Age. Whoever came before was assimilated or conquered. And again, we know very little about that. The Celts left evidence of themselves all over Britain. This is Tre Ceiri. It was built at the top of a mountain 1,200 feet above the valley floor. You can see this is a stone wall going all the way around. There are 150 stone hut circles inside there. We don't know why they built so high up. Once you climb up there, you're like, gee, who wants to do this every day? The indication was that it was for protection, but we don't know from whom. But there's monuments like monuments now, villages like this all over Britain, like the whole of Britain. What we do know is that by 43 AD, having built so high gave them a chance against the Romans who came next. So the Romans invaded Britain in 43 AD. They conquered all of England and parts of Scotland and Wales. This map shows the Celtic tribes at the time, and then the gold is the waves of the Roman invasions. England is a little bit flat, on the whole. And then once you get to Wales and to Scotland, you start seeing mountains, and that becomes a lot harder. That becomes guerrilla warfare and a lot more work. So the Romans called these native people Britons, Britons. From now on, when you hear the word Celts in England or Wales or wherever, just think Britons and Celts. They're the same thing. It's just the Roman name for them. So one of the important things about the way the Romans conquered Britain was that they wanted to control land and resources, but they didn't much care about the local population and what they did as long as they submitted. That was really what they cared about. This was a military conquest rather than for settlement with families. Most Romans were there on a tour of duty from other parts of the empire, in many cases not even from Rome. And as part of their conquest, the Romans eliminated the native political hierarchy and any military potential outside of the Roman system. So if you were a native Briton, you could join the Roman military. In every case, though, you were then sent elsewhere. This was like policy throughout the entire Roman Empire. So the people who fortified Hadrian's Wall were from northern Germany or Estonia, and then if you were a Briton and you were sent to Russia or wherever. They did, for obvious reasons, because you don't want trained military people, fostering rebellion in a country. You would much rather they don't speak the native language. So, Hadrian's Wall is right here. So the Romans left their mark on the landscape too. This is Hadrian's Wall, 78-mile wall, stone wall across the belt of England and Scotland. 78. Something like that. I can't remember. It's in that vicinity. They built infrastructure in order to govern, to extract resources, and to protect themselves. They also built forts, towns, and roads, and they left a cultural legacy as well, which we'll get to in a second, but the most important aspects of which were literacy and Christianity. So this is a little walls. So Hadrian's Wall is the red line there. So that's like Hadrian. There's tons of movies about this, tons of books about this. Okay, the blue line is actually called the Antonine Wall. They tried for 20 years. It's a turf wall. It's worth seeing. It's kind of cool. But they actually tried to capture all of that, and then they built this other wall and then retreated back below it, within 20 years. And then there's one more wall here. It's called Offa's Dyke, another 178.5-mile wall, a turf wall as well. That was built by the Saxons, which we're getting to here next. The Romans controlled Britain for 400 years until they marched away in 410 AD in order to protect other parts of the empire, including Rome. Unusually for conquerors, they pretty much just up and left. Not entirely without notice, but relatively abruptly. Like they were at Hadrian's Wall till 408. I mean, they were just there and then they were gone. But because the Romans had eliminated the native political leadership and military, their departure left the Britons leaderless and defenseless. Leaving them wide open for the Saxons. So the Saxons were a combination of Jutes, Angles, and Saxons, and maybe other ethnic groups too, all from Northern Europe, Germany kind of area. They started out raiding and then eventually brought their families to settle, unlike the Romans. At the time, we have the Britons wrote letters to the Romans, who actually had retreated by then to Constantinople, begging them to return. The Romans replied, nope, tough luck, you got to learn to defend for yourselves. This new conquest was also a cultural clash because the Saxons were illiterate pagans, and the Britons, particularly the elite, had all converted to Christianity when Constantine did in 313. So it'd been 100 years of Christianity. The Britons were some of the earliest Christians in the world as a people. And so that was part of the context of those letters to the Romans that was like, you've left us open to these pagans, heathens who are coming in, and, we're the same, religion, and they didn't care. So nonetheless, the Saxons eventually consolidated their hold on all of what is now England. Okay, so the native Britons were now entirely forced into the west, occupying what is now Wales. So you asked what the conflict was. Two totally different peoples. So the Welsh were conquered, and the whole thing was taken over. And in fact, so you had Celts and you had Britons, same people. Welsh, same people. But here's the thing. Welsh as a word means foreigner or slave in Saxon. So think about that every time. Like I say Wales, and it's like, yeah, Welsh, yeah, it means slave. Because they enslaved them in huge numbers. And then the rest, retreated to the mountains, which was the last bastion. There was some up in northern Scotland. There's some northern kingdoms, they were known as. Eventually, the Saxons took over it all. The Welsh word for themselves is actually Cymry, Cymry, meaning, in a way, the people. Where are we now? To keep out Welsh incursions into England, around 800 AD, the Saxons built this turf wall off this dike. It's a 20-foot high, 170-mile turf wall separating England and Wales. It was dug out on the Welsh side in a giant ditch and then piled up on the English side so the English could look over Wales and obviously prevent them from coming in. There's apocryphal laws, but any Welshman found on the east side of the dike after dark is executed. I mean, that's the kind of thing. The Saxons, however, were not left alone for very long. Not long after the building of Offa's Dyke and the consolidation of England under King Alfred of Wessex, for example, they faced new raiders from the east, the Danes. Okay, so these are the first of the Viking invaders, Viking being an occupation, not an ethnic group. So they would go a Viking. So Viking, Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, but predominantly Danes. The Danes conquered lands all across the coasts of Britain, Ireland, France, Sicily, all the way to Russia. So, for example, sorry, that's my sister calling. All the way to Russia. So the Rus are actually Danes. So the source of Russia as a name is actually Danes. And they founded Dublin and ruled it for 400 years. They began raiding in England at Lindisfarne Priory in 793 AD. Next one. By now, the Saxons had converted to Christianity, however, so this was once again a cultural clash between the great heathen army, not my name, that was what the Saxons called them, the great heathen army of 865, and again, Christians, which the Saxons had become. Ultimately, England was divided between Saxons and Danes, and like the Saxons before them, the Danes brought their families and settled. Northern Europe must have been a really cold and unpleasant place for all these people to want to come. Yeah. So for a period of time then, the Saxon attention turned instead of west into Wales, east into Daneland, which gave the Welsh some breathing room, and it marks a period of time where Welsh culture and the Welsh people really came into their own. So once again, we have the map, the three kingdoms, Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth. Yeah. The Welsh had their own laws, the laws of Hywel Dda, which were codified around 945 AD. Though the laws themselves were much older. These laws outlined obligations of kings to their citizens and vice versa. This is not feudalism at all. There were more rights for women. They could divorce. They had control over their own children. Illegitimate children could inherit equally with legitimate ones as long as their father acknowledged them. Truthfully, in the Welsh context, illegitimate doesn't even make sense. Though I have a story of the first book in my Gareth and Gwen Medieval Mysteries, The Good Knight. One of the main characters, Prince Hywel, is the son of the king. He's the heir to the throne, and he's illegitimate from his earlier relationship with his father's. And I got a 1-star review back in the day from someone that was like, there is no way an illegitimate son could ever inherit. And I'm like, yeah, no, you've got no idea. So it's another example of me educating my readers, or in this case, failing to educate my readers about medieval Wales. So the Welsh continued to be culturally different from the Saxons. Well, they spoke Welsh, for starters. They were herders, not farmers, except on Anglesey and in the lowlands where it's flat, you can do fields better. Mostly they herded sheep and cattle. Wales had a relatively small population and few towns. At the time of Llywelyn, the time of Crouchback, there were probably 300,000 Welsh. Again, think of Umatilla County, 300,000 Welsh and 3 million English.
On the other side of the wall?
Yeah, just east there. And these kingdoms were divided into further smaller units called, cantrevs and commots. So there was an extensive administrative structure in Wales. Each of these units had its administrative center where the king or his representative held court. So in Gwynedd, there were 22 llysoedd, palaces, but really administrative centers, where the king would come or a judge would come and adjudicate and listen to pleas and so on. So these were not castles, but with walls designed more to keep out marauding cattle than attacks. The key point being Welsh kings did not have to protect themselves from their own people. That's why you build castles. So in ruling themselves, the Welsh established their own dynasties and kingdoms. Rhodri Mawr, who's the guy on the top, Rhodri the Great, was the king of Gwynedd, and he was the founder of both the ruling houses of Dynevor and Powys and Gwynedd that I've talked about before. So in this chart, you've got the brown boxes are the rulers of Powys and the yellow of Gwynedd, and then sometimes you have people who are both. So in this, you'll see Hywel Dda, who established the laws, is up there at the top. He ruled all of Wales. And then down here at the bottom is Llywelyn the last, Llywelyn ap Griffith, who has been of particular concern to me. Okay, and so then, as fate would have it, Welsh autonomy could not last, because we have our last invaders, the Normans. So the key thing to know here is that Normandy was created, backing up. In 845 AD, 843, the Danes sacked Paris. And the King of France had this great idea to bribe the Danes to go away and leave Paris and the rest of France alone. And they took the deal, and he gave them Normandy. So they started speaking French. They converted to Christianity. They were called Normans, but they're just Danes. They're Danes again, and they still love to go a Viking. So in 1066, in the person of William the Conqueror, the Normans invaded initially England, but invaded Britain. The Norman recipe for victory is invade with an army, build castles, a lot of them, rule with an iron fist, and in this way, sorry, I lost myself. Yeah. And in this way, they can take over a country essentially with overwhelming force. They also brought all of their own bishops. They brought their own brand of Christianity. They brought their own laws. And this is taking over the Saxons, right? We're starting with the Saxons, once again with the lowlands. And again, like the Romans, they wanted control of the resources and the land, and they didn't much care about the people as long as they submitted. So in the same way, the Britons never became Roman. The Saxons never became Norman. We don't speak French. You know, in England, they don't speak French because it was like, I kind of think of it as like a frosting on a cake, right? The cake, still Saxon. The top layer, the control, all of that is Norman. Still, the Normans struggled to control the whole of Britain. As with every conquering people who'd come before them, they had an easier time in the south and the east than they did in Scotland or Wales. Instead, the newly crowned King William created what became known as marcher lordships. So the march is the borderlands between England and Wales. March means fence in French, or did at the time. So they're guarding the fence. And anyway, he gave those lands to his three top guys, made them earls, Chester, Shrewsbury, and Hereford, and said, take what land you can, both in the March and in Wales, and if you take it, you can keep it. So they carved out many kingdoms for themselves. The conflict that followed is the main reason Wales has the highest number of castles per square mile in any country in Europe. Yeah. So to survive, the Welsh built their own castles. They were smaller. They were more of a refuge or designed to guard a pass or protect their cattle from the invaders. The Normans took control of South and East Wales, while the North and West held off the Normans for 200 years, 200 more years. Which brings us to Llywelyn. Llywelyn is important because his lifespan and rule encompassed the last 50 years of Welsh independence. Over the course of the 13th century, the Welsh had been forced to engage more and more with the Normans and found their position growing weaker and weaker. This brought Llywelyn into conflict with the kings of England, initially King Henry III, and then eventually Edward I. There was a first Welsh war that started in 1277, which resulted in a terrible loss for the Welsh and Llywelyn, and a near complete takeover of the country by the English. Llywelyn's lands were reduced to just those west of the Conwy River, a small fraction of what he'd had before, and the English literally took over all the rest. Except for, actually east of the Conwy River, was given to his brother, David, who had been at King Edward's side for the invasion. And that is a long story. We have a YouTube video about that, if anybody is interested. So the story of the last Welsh War begins on Palm Sunday, 1282, 5 years after that initial conquest. So David, Llywelyn's brother, who I said had been at Edward's side throughout actually this whole thing, decided kind of along the lines of Lando Calrissian that this deal is getting worse all the time. And so he actually was the one to organize a simultaneous attack on 3 castles, Howard and Aberystwyth and Harlech, all owned by the English, to begin the rebellion of 1282. It was hugely successful. The Welsh had a bunch of victories, and initially, actually, Llywelyn didn't join in. There are a number of reasons for that. One is he didn't trust his brother David, who'd of course been his enemy for half his life. Also, his wife Eleanor was pregnant with their first child. And actually, I can't emphasize enough how unique, unusual this was in that Llywelyn was over 50. This was his first child ever conceived. And so he had hope, of course, that this child would be a son and that there would be something for that son to inherit if he didn't join the rebellion, because David was just, inconstant and didn't trust him. But then Eleanor died in childbirth, and the baby was a girl. And in addition, there was a huge victory for the Welsh, also in June, just with a few days before Eleanor died, at a place called Pendleton, which actually that is not a picture of. But at that point, Llywelyn joins the rebellion and is immediately accorded the allegiance of all the other Welsh lords who are in rebellion. And my sense is, honestly, he felt he had nothing left to lose. So this slide shows the series of events of 1282 leading up to the conquest of Wales. Most of these are victories. So we have the Palm Sunday victories of those castles. We have the victory at Pendleton and come all the way around to the victory for the Welsh at the Menai Strait in November. Once this battle was won, Llywelyn received a letter from his nephews, Edmund and Roger Mortimer, marcher lords who'd been supporters of King Edward. They were offering to change allegiance, along with a host of other more minor lords who would come along with them. Given the Welsh successes on the battlefield, that it was winter, that the English barons were tired of war, and the king was running out of money, there was reason for Llywelyn to believe that was a credible offer, on top of which these were his kin. They were his nephews. So he went to meet them. This is a quote from the Chronicle of the Kings. "And then Llywelyn ap Griffith left David, his brother, guarding Gwynedd, and he himself and his host went to gain possession of Powys and Beest. And he gained possession as far as Llanganton. And thereupon he sent his men and his steward to receive the homage of the men of Brycheiniog. And the prince was left with but a few men with him. And then Roger Mortimer and Griffith ap Gwenwyn, and with them the king's host, came upon them without warning. And then Llywelyn and his foremost men were slain on the day of Damasus the Pope, a fortnight to the day from Christmas Day, and that was a Friday." In other words, December 11th, 1282. The English cut off Llywelyn's head, washed it in this well, and put it on a pike at the Tower of London, where it stayed for 20 years. Chroniclers at the time said that if Llywelyn had lived only a few more weeks, all of Wales would have flocked to his banner. The failure of the Mortimer plot might have been the final nail in the coffin of a war that had not been going well for Edward. But none of that happened, of course, because Llywelyn died. With Llywelyn's death, from that moment, Edward attempted to eliminate the Welsh way of life in favor of the English one. The following is an idea of what was in people's minds at the royal court. This is a quote from a letter written by an English royal clerk, Master Stephen St. George, upon receiving word of Llywelyn's death, dated January of 1283. "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth to men of good will, a triumph to the English, victory to King Edward, honor to the church, rejoicing to the Christian faith, and to the Welsh, everlasting extermination." Edward began by building what has become known as his Iron Ring of castles. This is a series of castles built around the margins of Gwynedd and Powys, where each castle could be supplied from the sea. Once again, the Welsh are kind of in the mountains. They don't need to be resupplied, but the English need to be because it's a hostile populace. Edward needed these castles at all, of course, once again, because he needed to protect himself from the people he conquered and have a base from which to continue the conquest, right? Obviously, the difference between having a native king and a foreign one. At the Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284, King Edward abrogated Welsh laws and customs, eliminating all Welsh governors, much of the Welsh legal system, boundaries, church leaders, and commerce. It also established the English system of sheriffs. Edward brought in planted communities. English settlers shipped in to live inside the walled towns of the castles that he established. So this Conwy Castle has one, Carnarvon Castle has one. Actually, there were half a dozen. So you have English people living inside Wales, the local people obviously evicted. The Welsh were expelled and not allowed to live inside the towns, in some cases for hundreds of years. So in 1336, admittedly only 50 years after the conquest, some Welsh people who tried to live in Criccieth were expelled. But in Carnarvon, no Welsh people were allowed to live in Carnarvon proper until the 1500s. So nearly 300 years after the conquest. The English controlled all the resources, trade, and commerce. At the same time, they taxed the Welsh and monitored them. They also spoke only French or English. So if you were a Welsh person and wanted to do business in your own country, you had to learn French or English. It gets worse, if you can imagine that. So in addition, one member of every family had to check in at one of these English towns once a week to be counted. And the point of which, in large part, was to curtail the Welsh way of life, which had been nomadic, or what, like in North America, we call a seasonal round. So you would have like highlands in the summer, lowlands in the winter, following the cattle and the sheep. Yeah. Overall, King Edward was ruthless in his efforts to meld a single kingdom out of disparate peoples, and as always, in so doing, English and English people were preeminent. This is Carnarvon, which is a lovely town now. Carnarvon became the seat of Edward's administration in Wales. It had been an administrative center for Llywelyn and all the kings of Wales before him since the departure of the Romans. The story goes that the Welsh High Council, such as it was by then, told Edward that they would never accept a ruler not born in Wales. Thus, in 1284, Edward hauled his 8-month pregnant wife, Eleanor, to Carnarvon so that Edward II, or became known as Edward II, could be born in the half-built Carnarvon Castle. And since then, the Prince of Wales has always been the son of the English king. Which brings me to my book, Crouchback. So this is really the starting moment for the series. It's set in April of 1284 when King Edward and Eleanor are there in Carnarvon for the birth of Edward II. I realize all of that sounds terribly depressing, doesn't it? It's like, why would anybody want to write a book set in this time? And to tell you the truth, all my previous, it's like 48 books were set during the time of independence. It took me a long time, 15 years, to decide to write a book after the conquest, in part because I felt like it might be depressing. One of my favorite writing quotes, though, talks about, in order to write a good book, the author needs to give their character a very bad day and make it worse. So in the world of medieval Wales, there's really nothing worse than the triumph of King Edward and the conquest of Wales. And my two main characters, Catrin and Rhys, for them, their world in many ways really had come to an end. And I found myself exploring how a person could have this happen to them and then still live. Because the truth is, that's what the people of Wales did. 750 years later, the people in Carnarvon are speaking Welsh. 750 years of the same behavior on the part of the English that King Edward started in 1284 or 1282 has continued kind of really to this day. Like not that long ago, You know, you hear the BBC mocking the pronunciation of a Welsh word, or, you know, you all the time about, oh, there's no vowels, or, you know, whatever it is. Actually, one example is like Notting Hill, which is a lovely movie. It's a crazy Welsh stereotypical roommate that he has. And it's like not something that as Americans we would really know, but if you're Welsh, you know that that's what that was. At the same time, the Welsh prospered despite all of that for this whole time. And that was partly what I wanted to explore too. Like, how did they do that? Next. So, throughout all my books, Wales is showcased as having its own culture and the Welsh people as their own people. I have 5 series in all, as we're saying, over 50 books. These two here, this little chart, the same chart we saw before. So the Lion of Wales and the Last Pendragon. The Lion of Wales is a King Arthur set in the 500s. The Last Pendragon is 100 years after that. The Gareth and Gwen Medieval Mysteries is set in the time of Owain Gwynedd. 1143 is the first one. So in the height of they're engaged with the Normans, but they're still independent. The After Kilmeri series is alternate history time travel, where Llywelyn lives. It was actually my first book was Footsteps in Time, and that sort of kicked off the whole thing of, okay, so what if Llywelyn lived? What's going to happen? How's the world going to be a different place? So that's now 20 books long. And then the last one, the Welsh Guard Mysteries. Which brings me back to my question as to why write a book set in such a dark time. And honestly, the answer for me is that Crouchbacks, it's not about grief, as it turns out at all, but about hope and perseverance and courage and love and finding joy in the darkest moments of our lives. Yeah. Thank you. I am happy to answer any questions about anything, if you have them.
Wow.
How hard was it to learn to speak?
Welsh. So I had been trying since about 2013 and felt myself to be an abject beginner for years and years and years. I mean, I learned both Spanish and French at university. I read both very well, still can't speak it. I mean, I can. I'm working on it. I'm working on my Spanish, whatever. But not to the extent of like really sitting down and having a conversation. And so we have 4 kids and we're homeschooling. So Taryn, our youngest, who's now 21, but he, back in, during COVID, so 2021, he was at the end of his sort of high school at home. And he had to learn a foreign language. He and I had been doing Welsh together for a lot of this time. But for college, all that was offered, BMCC, Spanish. So he started taking Spanish, and I was like, I'm gonna try Welsh one more time just to prove it's impossible. And I cannot recommend it more highly, a program online called Say Something in Welsh. It's all oral. So there's no written, because reading it screws up English speakers. You cannot read this thing. Don't try. You gotta just listen. And I just listened. And as Dan says, so the secret sauce is that I have 3 boys, right? And they play computer games. And there's one game that I played with them called Diablo. And I decided that all these years of learning Welsh is so boring to listen. It's so boring. And I'm like, so I turned the sound off on the computer game and turned on the volume for the Welsh, and I would just kill skeletons or whatever, and recite the Welsh, and recite it, and recite it, and recite it, and recite it. And it's COVID, right? So we're not doing anything else. And so, so I started 4 years ago now. People call me fluent, clearly not native, but I can hold my own. So, yeah.
It was so interesting to hear how the title of province of Wales was,
Yeah.
appropriated
Appropriated by the King of England, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say more about where's Wales today in the thinking of London, or how it's
Yeah.
administered? Is it, can you call it independent today?
Is not independent. Wales got its own parliament in 1999. So up until 1999, they were viewed like Yorkshire by Parliament. Parliament, or London as a whole, had control of every aspect of Welsh governance and law. So, and one of the big things, and particularly for the Welsh speakers, is they had control of the school system. So it was all English all the time. And so, certainly, and during the 20th century, I mean, we know people, they were punished for speaking Welsh in schools. The English tend to view Wales as like the resource extraction still. So where is the first nuclear power plant in Britain built? Raise your hand if you said Snowdonia, a national park, as far from London as you can get, literally. So I would say that the attitude of the bulk of people in Parliament today, and English people today, is that Wales is like Yorkshire or the Lake District. It's not they come, they're surprised that anybody could possibly speak Welsh. Why can't you appreciate the benefits of being incorporated into the Kingdom of England? Yeah, I wouldn't say that's changed a lot. People are nicer than that. We have a lot of lovely English friends who love Wales, who just love Wales, but that's definitely like a thing. So, yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, with the prince abdicating, some of like Harry stepping down or away.
Yeah, but not William.
Not William.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they have to
Nothing against Charles or William. I mean, honestly, they inherited a system such as it is. But it is definitely a thing, and it's still a thing when Elizabeth died and Charles became king, and he immediately named William the Prince of Wales, without even sending a note to the Welsh Parliament about it. There's not our Prince of Wales, right? So it's hard too, because particularly there's a whole streak of Welsh nationalism, like in Scotland. You may have heard about Scotland and the vote and everything. I mean, interesting situation, for example, is in respect to water. Okay, so Wales gets a lot of water, more than England. A lot of Wales water supplies England for free, right? And when the English Parliament established the Welsh Parliament in 1999, they specifically made a caveat that Wales does not have control over its own water, for this reason. Because if Wales controlled its own water, it might actually have the ability to fund itself if England had to pay for Welsh water, but they don't. And they've flooded valleys, it's resource extraction. It's resource extraction. It's not really all that different than it was 300 years ago.
anywhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
We love Wales, obviously. We utterly love it. This is our son, Gareth, our third child, Gareth, at a place called Castell Utterly beautiful, fantastically beautiful. And it's still, there's 3 million people living in Wales, and I don't know, what is it? Yeah, I know. And 68 million or something in overall in Britain as a whole. So, it's tiny population, but
Is it
yeah.
green all year long?
It kind of is. It rains a lot. Rains a lot. Sometimes, you'll get a week without rain. It's amazing. We actually had 3 weeks without rain one time. But basically, if you go, it's like, I tell everybody, waterproof shoes. You need waterproof shoes. The grass is wet, your feet are wet. That's just the way it's going to be. So, yeah.
So what is your writing routine or your
Yeah.
structure? How do you do all this work?
Yeah, so I started writing in 2006 when our now 21-year-old was 2. And I wrote during his nap. That's what I got. The hour or whatever that was, that's what I got. I didn't start publishing until it had been 5 years, at which point he's now 7, right? So then the routine is a little bit different. It took a while, sort of everybody who starts writing a novel is an amateur when they start, like by definition. Nobody pays you for a book that you haven't written yet. So you kind of learn on the job as it is. And over the years, I have spent more and more time. I mean, now I have no kids at home at all, so I can work 12-hour days if I feel like it. But I try to write 1,000 words a day when I'm writing a new book. That's 4 double-spaced pages. That seems to be something that's manageable for me, where I can, like, day after day after day after day after day, I can do that. Other than that, I'm not traditionally published, so I don't have a publisher. Dan and I have our own publishing house, so I publish myself and have from the start. So in that case, that also includes all the business side that some authors don't have to worry about. So I have the writing side, and then I have the marketing and the business side, and you know, I just go back and forth between the two aspects of it. I mean, I treat it like a job, you know. And you know, truthfully, like, I've written 50 books or whatever in 20 years. A lot of authors, like that you'll know, Stephen King, Nora Roberts, or whatever, would routinely write 3 books a year. I'm not writing 3, I'm writing 2, but would write 3 books a year. But the publishers wouldn't allow them to publish under any given pen name more than 1 book a year, so they had to create new pen names. If you go now to, like, Nora Roberts' site or Jane Ann Kranz, who's another romance novelist I like, they had 3 pen names, but now she can be under 1, like, it's like writing as. But back in the day, they weren't allowed to do that. So I just all write under Sarah Woodbury, so there's no secret pen name for me. It's all one.
Could you address the impact that Amazon made on your empire?
I mean, Amazon's the big. Amazon back in 2011 gave me a chance. So I can only, in that respect, be grateful to them, because traditional publishers had a stranglehold on the entire system, right? And there were editors, agents, all gatekeepers to getting published. But Amazon said, we don't care. We don't care. Like, here's Nora Roberts' book and here's your book. Great. Everyone's equal in our ecosystem. That is not true anymore. But it was definitely true then. So my first paycheck from Amazon was for $22 in March of 2011, I guess. And you know, with Amazon, because it was such an even playing field, there really felt like if the book was good, it could find an audience. People could find it. There was a good search engine, none of which I necessarily think is true anymore, at Amazon in particular. They've got Kindle Unlimited. They've got, you know, all this exclusivity. I'm not exclusive. I'm wide. Wide meaning Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Google Play. You can find my books everywhere. And Amazon has tried to strangle that. Every single year is worse in that respect, in them trying to ratchet down on their control over authors, I think. It's a long thing. I mean, I can't help but appreciate what we started with. Truthfully, it was purely mercenary on their part. They wanted content for their Kindles, right? They were making Kindles, and they wanted people to be able to put content on there, and the big publishers didn't want to do ebooks because they wanted all of you to be paying $24.99 for books instead of $4.99, which was what mine cost. So, you know, it's all, you know, there's a lot of little money decisions that look different depending on your perspective, so, yeah. Did you have a?
Yeah, I was wondering, so you write, but you also research your books, right? How much do you spend a lot of time doing that?
Well, I can do, I've got one sentence about some place they are or something that's happened, and I'll spend an hour and a half down some rabbit hole trying to find the correct information. I try really, really hard to be historically accurate. I will not change an event to a different day just to suit my plot. You know, actually, it's interesting, and I say that because there is a practice of doing that. So, super popular series for people who do history stuff is Bernard Cornwell's The Last Kingdom. It's a Netflix show, which I highly recommend. Best 900 AD, awesome. and a series of books, very popular. But he changes, like for his first book, the final battle scene should be 2 years later, and he moves it up 2 years. It's like, yeah, I don't do that. I do invent characters, obviously. The main characters, Katrin and Fries, are invented, but all the surrounding cast is real. And if it's not real, I'll tell you in the back. But in terms of like the events, the history, all of that is research. Yeah, books, internet, yeah. Google Maps is great, that kind of thing.
Did living there, oops.
Nope. Go ahead.
Well, having done so many books, 50 books, do you have an outline? You write 1,000 words a day, but you already have your outline, you know how the story's going to go?
Yeah.
Or does it kind of track along and you fill in or change and do
Yeah,
what you want?
sometimes I have an outline. I mean, it can be good when writing a mystery to know who the killer is. I mean, honestly. And I usually do. Might change at 7/8 through the book, suddenly go, oh, wait, it would be so much better if it were this person, and then you have to go back and fill it in. So the part of writing I love is the discovery. So I'm not someone to have this massive, huge outline and then stick to it. If I did a massive outline, item 2, and we're already off doing something different than I wrote down anyway, so why bother actually doing that? I do, often have like a sort of a sweep, like it needs sort of aiming for this ending, kind of thing, and however you get there. And, there's times when I'm stuck and I put all my characters around a dining room table together and let them start talking, and then they solve my problems for me. So, yeah.
So I love the visuals that you brought, and so I know that you and Dan do a lot of hiking and wandering and rambling around the countryside.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, to what extent does that experience of just being in the place impact or influence a story?
Right. I mean, also, like, being there and speaking Welsh and being part of it, like, that's an important part of the writing, So we went for the first time in 2012. So I started writing 2006, based, whatever memories of the place had been back from when I was in college, couldn't afford to go. But we went in 2012, and we've been almost every year since then. We did 2.5 years during COVID, we couldn't go. But so that's sort of like walking in those hills, absolutely. Like for me, it's just like this wonderful, peaceful thing. But I love the little churches. You walk in, it's like, this was built in the 12th century. Like, that's crazy. How crazy wonderful is that? At the same time, there's also, like, Dan has a map of 1,500 places in Wales and Britain that are like on the map because either we want to go there or we've been there or whatever. And so, for example, one of the more recent Gareth and Gwen medieval mysteries is set at a place called Ysbyty Cynfyn. And Ysbyty Cynfyn, Ysbyty means hospital. And so we were driving down the road. Dan's like, hey, do you want to stop? We've got this place on the map. I'm like, sure, let's stop. So we stop, and it's actually not much on the internet, but it was like a giant panel, like a local council would put up.
It's a church.
Well, it's a church, but like there's a panel that you read, and it says, the reason it's called Ysbyty is it's a church of St. John is because they're Hospitallers. So the Hospitaller Commandery, which is like you have the Templars and the Hospitallers in the Holy Land during the Crusades. So the Hospitallers were in charge of hospital, caring for pilgrims along the road to Jerusalem, and the Templars were the more fighting arm. Eventually, they both ended up fighting. But anyway, here is a Hospitaller Commandery in the middle of nowhere in Wales with a church. The churchyard has like standing stones in a big circle all around it, like that's now formed the wall of the church. And then up on a bluff is like an old cairn, like that dates back thousands and thousands of years. And like we go visit, and I'm like, oh, totally putting a book here. Like, I don't care. Like, somehow we are coming here and we're doing a book. So, that kind of thing. And it's always interesting how when you go to little places like this, where someone typed up something in 1972 on a typewriter and tacked it to the bulletin board, and it's information you don't have anywhere else. Just actually being there, you can't get that anywhere else. You can't find it anywhere else. So, it's pretty great. Yeah.
Do your series and various different book series, were they written chronologically? Were they written en masse by category?
Well, so each of the series is chronological in that sense. But so the first book I wrote was called Footsteps in Time. It's the time travel one. We go back in time and we save Llewellyn's life. So that's set, Daughter of Time is a prequel. That's set in 1268. Footsteps in Time takes place in 1282 and then progresses from there. One of the artifacts of the way that I began writing and publishing was that I spent 5 years trying to get a traditional contract with Simon & Schuster, Random House, whatever, and my books have been rejected by every publisher in New York. And I'm not kidding about that, totally. And eventually I decided that I was just going to do it on my own. But the result was I had an agent. I had a couple of agents, but I had a big New York agent. But there's no point in writing a book to a sequel to a book you can't sell. So he was like, what else do you have? I'm like, here's another book I wrote set in 1143. Oh, and here's another book I set in 637 because I couldn't sell Footsteps in Time. I couldn't sell Cold My Heart. I couldn't sell The Last Pendragon. So I ended up, when I started publishing in 2011, with 4 different series and 4 different time periods and I've just been I just wrote all of those, then there's a lot more stories to tell in every single one of those series. So that's sort of how I started out until 2019 when I wrote Crouchback, which is the first book in the Welsh Guard Mysteries, which is 1284. Wow. So the series are clearly in different eras and not really written. What I do now is I just sort of go around. So I'll write an After Kumari book set in, at the moment, 1298. And then, I'm writing right now, I've got Outlaw, which is the next Welsh Guard mystery. That is set in 1284 still. And then I'll go back to Gareth and Gwen, which is, 1151, that kind of thing.
And just to, please don't go just for a second yet. How do you have Welsh ancestry?
So if you have a last name that's a first name, there's a very high chance that you have a Welsh ancestry. So if anywhere in your tree you have a last name as a first name. So for example, Evans, Pritchard, ap Richard, Rees, ap Rees, Price, ap Rees. Not just Llewellyn. There's Llewellyns in this town, that's for sure. But like the way that they did their names, Howell is ap Howell, it's a sort of Americanized. So there's a lot, Williams, you could just go on and on. Anybody who has a first name as a last name, very often it's a Welsh ancestry. So more people have it than they think they have it.
Well, thank you, Sarah.
Yep.
So